So let's start here in verse 24. It says, "Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon." Right? So at this point, he's gotten the dream, he's gotten the interpretation, but he hasn't told anyone yet. He went and said thus to him, "Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation." Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him, "I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation." And the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, "Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation?" And Daniel answered in the presence of the king, and he said, "The secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these." So now he gets into what the dream was, the contents. "As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. But as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes who make known the interpretation to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart." Here it is. "You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found, and the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king. You, O king, are a king of kings. For the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand, and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. But after you shall arise another kingdom, inferior to yours, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. Whereas you saw the feet and the toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. Yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. And as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. It's foolproof. It's 100%. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel, and he commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. The king answered Daniel, and he said, "Truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret." Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. And Daniel petitioned the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king. That was a lot to read. Did you guys follow that? All right, good, because there's a lot to cover with that. So let's just start here. Daniel proclaims what the dream is. And I believe that after all this is said and done, obviously we see Nebuchadnezzar fall on his face, prostrate before Daniel, that there was without a shadow of a doubt that he gave the contents of the dream 100% perfectly, to him. And so the fact that Nebuchadnezzar heard the contents of the dream without ever telling anyone, he knew that the interpretation would also be 100% true, right? And so I think that's what's amazing about all of this. And God's going to get the glory for all this. Daniel does not want this. He always points to Christ or to God for this. But with this dream, there's this great, what's it say in verse 31? There's a great image that stands before Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar's in the dream. He's looking, and there's this monstrous image, and it's an image of a man, right? It's in the shape of a man, a human. And its head is made of what material? Gold, right? And then its chest and his arms were made of what material? What's a little bit less than gold? Rust? Bronze? Oh, no. Silver, yeah. You guys don't watch the Olympics? Come on. So that we got gold, we've got silver, which comes in second place. And then the belly and the thighs, which is a little bit lower than the arms, is bronze. There we go, third place. But then, what do we have at the bottom? Iron, right? And iron is what we see that, and I'll explain this a little more in depth as we go verse by verse, but I just want to make sure we understand this before we get to that point. The fourth material and the fourth part of the body of the image, being the legs, is iron, right? Then we get to the fifth part, which is similar to the fourth part. So we're going to add it to the fourth part. So there's really four different segments of this image, right? With four different pieces of material. You've got the gold, you got the silver, you have the bronze, then you have the iron. The legs are completely iron, but as we get to the feet, the iron is no longer alone, but it's mixed with what? Clay, right? Now this all sounds goofy, it sounds weird, but God is He gives us things so simply sometimes that we just visually like to see things and to understand things in our own, we understand what gold and silver and bronze, and especially in their time, because everything was made in those materials, right? Now for us it would be plastic, wood, and something else. Rubber, yeah, there you go. As rubber, plastic? I don't know. Anyways, so they understood this. This was common to their time. It's obviously common to our time too. So we see this image standing before Nebuchadnezzar, and then as we get into the interpretation, we're going to see that there's these four sections, four pieces of material, and they're all going to represent different kingdoms. They're all going to represent different parts of history, right? Because there have been different kingdoms throughout history. Would you guys agree with me? Right? You would actually probably study this in your history class, or you probably already have, in regards to these kingdoms that were established years ago, 2,000 years ago. And we'll get into that. So let's start in verse 24. So it says, Daniel went to Arioch, right? He got the dream. He goes to the executioner, right? Arioch was the guy that the king had appointed to do what? Destroy the wise men of Babylon. This is the guy who's going to go around and kill all the wise men. So Daniel goes to him, and he says this, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. So I love Daniel's heart, right? The very first thing he says is, don't destroy the wise men. Because easily he could have said, look, I've got the dream, I've got the interpretation. Don't kill me and my buddies. Do whatever else you want, right? Daniel knows that these guys are are false, whatever they proclaim to be, right? That they are not walking in the Spirit, that they are not a part of God's kingdom, that they are the opposite. Yet that Daniel has compassion on them and says, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. And so he wants to meet with Nebuchadnezzar so that he can reveal the dream. So Arioch, in verse 25, he quickly brought Daniel before the king, and he said thus to the king, I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. What does that sound like? The words here, I have found, are pretty emphatic. Arioch is clearly taking credit for finding Daniel, right? He says, I have found a man. Is that what happened? No, right? Because in verse 24 it says that Daniel went to Arioch. Without Daniel having gone to him, Arioch would have never found him or been able to bring him to the king. So we see him glorifying himself in this and trying to take credit for something he did not do. But then Daniel, who could, rightfully so, receive the credit, denies it and gives all the glory to God. Vastly two different approaches, two different people, two different hearts, right? And I think for us, sometimes it's so easy to take credit, it's so easy to glorify ourselves, especially when something is done well or, we're going to get the props and the credit for it. But at the end of the day, we have to remember that anything that we've been gifted with, anything that we have, is because of a faithful and good and sovereign God. And so He's the one who deserves the credit and the glory. Whatever it may be, maybe not. It's not going to be something as spectacular as this. You're going to stand before the president who has had a dream that no one can tell, and you're the one that God has told the dream to and the interpretation. You're going to go stand before Him and do that, right? Maybe that's not it. Maybe it's something simple, something simple within your homes, in your family, in your school. Because listen, a guy like Arioch is very similar to Nebuchadnezzar. Very prideful. And what's going to happen is Nebuchadnezzar is going to be turned into like the beasts of the field because of his pride. So with pride comes what? Destruction. And a haughty spirit before the fall. Isn't that what Proverbs tells us? Pride comes before destruction and a haughty spirit before the fall. And so you got to understand that if we ever boast, if we ever take credit, if we ever, put ourselves on a pedestal, that eventually God will allow us to fall on our faces. And usually it's not pretty and it's not pleasant, right? But if we give God the credit and the glory, one, that's doing the right thing because He's worthy of it. And two, you'll never have to feel the pain of falling because of your pride. So verse 26, the king answered and he said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? So again, he requires two things, one being the dream and two, its interpretation. So Daniel answered in the presence of the king and he said, the secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. So Daniel wants to make it clear, abundantly clear, that man cannot know both the content and the interpretation of the dream. It's impossible. Man does not have that wisdom. Man does not have that ability, right? So he wants to make it clear that all these wise men could not do it. In their own wisdom, they could not do it. And with their gods, they could not do it. Right? Their gods would not reveal it to them. Why is that? There you go. It's very simple. They're not real. Right? They're not real. There's only one God. There's only one true living God. There's only one way to God, and that's through Jesus. Right? There is only one truth. Not everyone lives their own truth and finds a different path to a higher being that's different than another higher being. There's not multiple creators. There's not multiple gods. There's one true living God. There's only one way. And for many people, that's a tough pill to swallow because they don't like the idea of there's only one way to heaven. There's only one way to salvation. There's only one way to God. Right? Like they want multiple ways. They want you live the life that you want to live. I'll live the life that I want to live. You believe what you believe. I'll believe what I'll believe. And in the end, it's just going to work out. And we'll all get to heaven. We'll all be fine. You know, your religion's going to be right. This religion's going to be right. And that religion's going to be right. But in a world that we live in, you know, with absolute truths, that can't be. That doesn't work. That goes against, you know, the very fabric of nature. And so what happens is people don't like, again, the idea that there's just one way. But what I liked, and I think it's a perspective, I think people who don't like that there's one way don't realize and are not grateful that there is a way. Right? The fact that there is a way to God, because we shouldn't even be allowed. We shouldn't have that right. We shouldn't have the grace to come before a perfect, righteous Father through the death and sacrifice and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Right? The fact that I have a way to God blows my mind. I'm so thankful that there's one way. Right? I could care less if there was multiple ways. There isn't. So their gods cannot reveal to them what the dream is because they're not real. So again, there's one God. And there is a radical difference between supernatural revelation, which comes from God and God alone, and human wisdom. The human wisdom that we have. And I will stand up here and tell you that I'm not smart at all. But I will tell you that even the smartest man on earth is nothing in comparison to God. Nothing. Like, even if we try, I mean, I can't even give you an example, but remember the time that they tried to get closer to God, building the Tower of Babel? What did God do? Well, he didn't destroy them, but he destroyed the tower, and then he changed their languages so that they couldn't even communicate to build a tower. Like, how amazing is that? Like, a creator did that. You know, like man could not see that coming. Man could not, you know, work its way around that. Like, no, like we are foolish people. The wisdom of the world is foolishness. God, through His Word, and even in this, there's so much good wisdom that's far beyond man's. And so what we find out is that the difference between the supernatural revelation and human wisdom is vastly different. And I think Daniel is in effect coming here in verse 27, basically saying before he even gives the dream and the interpretation, he stands before King Nebuchadnezzar and says, look, I know that you've put me through 3 years of university, college, teachings. You know, I did all the courses. You taught me all your Chaldean ways and Babylonian ways. You changed my name. You taught me your languages. You taught me your history. You taught me your math. You taught me everything. But I'll tell you this, none of that is the reason why I know what I know. So don't take credit for it. Right? The wisdom of man is nothing in comparison to the revelation and the wisdom of God. God makes the wisdom of the wise foolish. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 26 through 29 says this. For you see your calling, brethren, that not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, and not many noble are called. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty. And the base things of the world and the things which are despised God has chosen, and the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are, that no flesh should glory in His presence. So oftentimes God uses unlikely people because it's a clear, understanding that the most unlikely of people to do the mighty works of God is by God and God alone. It's not by my eloquence, it's not by my skill, it's not by my gifting, although God can provide those, and it doesn't negate you from being used by God, but it makes it very clear when God uses us as foolish people, and we realize that we are foolish people, to further His kingdom through His might and through His wisdom and through His power, so that He alone gets the glory. It's so important. Right? We were created for His glory. We were created for His purpose. It's not for us to glorify in ourselves or to glorify others. It's for Him and Him alone. So here in verse 28, Daniel says this: there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets. So we see again Daniel's humility, proclaiming again that it's God and God alone. And he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. So Daniel takes no credit. It'd be so easy. Guys, it would be so tempting at this point to take the credit. But he doesn't. He does the right thing. And I don't know if it was so much of like I'm sure there was an internal battle that Daniel had, but I think also this was just his nature. This was who he was because he spent time with the Lord. It wasn't like, he got up there and he's like, oh, I really want to take credit. No, his nature was like, I love God. He's revealed these things to me. Like he gets the credit. This is just who I am. I want to give him the credit. I want to give him the glory. Again, it's God in heaven who does what? Who reveals secrets, who reveals mysteries. So Daniel's humility is clear here. Should we ever exalt ourselves? No. We shouldn't. And I think, application-wise, in life, it's good not to exalt yourself because you can be quickly humbled. But also at the end of the day, exaltation should happen and come from the Lord alone. And we see this in 1 Peter chapter 5. We see it even in some of the parables that Jesus gives. He talks about if you're invited to a wedding, don't go sit in the front row, right? Like there's certain things like don't put yourself on a pedestal, don't exalt yourself. We're to do the opposite of what the world does, right? The world would tell you like always, get a leg up, climb the ladder, promote yourself, exalt yourself, glorify yourself, praise yourself, receive as much as you can. But the Word of God is the antithesis. It's the opposite of that. Who God is, who Jesus is the opposite, right? He says, I didn't come to be served, but to do what? To serve. Oh, hey, cool. To serve, right? Like if you want to live, then you got to die, right? If you want to be exalted, you have to humble yourself, right? This is what the teachings that we see, and this is wisdom, this is truth. And so 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 5 through 6 says this: likewise, you younger people, submit yourselves to your elders. Yes, all of you be submissive to one another, and be clothed with humility. For God does what? He resists the proud, but he gives grace to who? The humble. The humble. I think you could probably find in every type of sin, if you want to define types of sin, that at the center of it all is pride. Right? We see that even in the first sin with Adam and Eve. It was pride. Right? What did Satan tell, Eve in the temptation? God's holding back from you. He doesn't want you to be like him. He doesn't want your eyes opened. And then there's that draw, that temptation of the pride to exalt ourselves, right? To bring us to the status of God, right? The same temptation that we see with Lucifer, right? It wasn't good enough to be second in the kingdom. He wanted to be like God or greater. So God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time. There is a greater exaltation that comes from God than you could ever do for your own self, or that any man could ever do for you. The exaltation that we receive here on earth is momentary. The recognition, the praise that you receive from people is momentary, because after a moment, the praise and the recognition now turns back to themselves, because we all struggle with pride, right? Those who aren't born again, there's always that struggle. There's always that self-exaltation with pride. So, one thing that we see here in verse 28 is that Daniel says that there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets. So God sees everything. And this isn't like to scare you, like, oh my gosh, God saw me do that thing, right? Like, obviously he did. We can't deny that. But in the same sense, it's nice to know. It's not a fear tactic, but it's It's a hopeful thing. It's a nice thing. It's a comforting thing that God sees and he knows all, that there's nothing hidden from him. So any type of injustice, any type of thing that we think, we won't get credit for, right? Like, oh man, I did all that work and no one saw it. I picked up that trash and man, I didn't get any credit for that. Or like, I did all this hard work at home and, my siblings got credit for that, but I didn't. Right? God sees. God sees, he knows, he'll exalt. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 13 says, there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all things are naked and open to the eyes of him to whom we must give account. The other nice thing is that God sees you. God sees me. Right? You are not just some unknown person. That God, you walk up to him and he's like, oh, I forgot I created you. Like, who are you? You know what I mean? Like, God knows us individually. He sees us. So that's a comforting thing. But again, obviously, he sees everything that we do. He sees the harmless things that we do. He sees, obviously, the bad things that we do. And it's important to know that what we do in secret is important because a lot of times the root of our problems stem from what happens in secret. Right? A few years later after Daniel, we're going to see Ezekiel. And Ezekiel's going to be living in Babylon as well. And he would have visions of what's going on back in Jerusalem. And one of those visions and what he sees is the wicked things and the evil things that the leaders are doing in secret. And we see this in Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 12. He says, then God said to me, Son of man, have you seen what the elders of the house of Israel do in the dark, every man in the room of his idols? For they say, the Lord does not see us, the Lord has forsaken the land. And it's so important for us as believers to live the same way that we would do in secret or in the dark as we do in the light, right? And in a sense, we're not even to live in the dark, we're to always live in the light, right? That everything that we do is in the light, that we walk in the light because we are no longer what? We're no longer darkness. Ephesians 5:8, for you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. We're to do that. And I'll tell you this, it's a freeing thing. This isn't like a scare tactic, again, that God, oh my gosh, he sees everything you do and it's going to be so embarrassing and guilt-ridden. No, like if that is happening, repentance, forgiveness, and then walk in the Spirit, which is walking in the light. And there's a freedom to that. 1 John chapter 1, verse 7 says, if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus Christ, his Son, cleanses us from all sin. So walk in the light. The last thing that we're going to see in verse 28 is he says this, he's made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. And so we see that what is happening is in this dream, God is revealing to Nebuchadnezzar and all of us and everyone who's going to read this, that there is something that's going to happen in the latter days, and I think it's twofold. It's in regards to the future. One is both near in Nebuchadnezzar's time, and one is both far, beyond our time, something to come even in the future of our time. Like it hasn't happened yet, even now in 2024. And we're going to see what that is as we go through this. So verse 29. As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. But as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes who make known the interpretation of the king, that you may know the thoughts of your heart. So again, the continued humility. Right? It's not good enough to just be humble at the beginning. We've got to continue this. And so Daniel does this. Right? He continues to reveal to Nebuchadnezzar, look, again, this hasn't been revealed to me because of some wisdom that I have or anything. I'm not special. Right? This is all through God and his grace. He gets the glory. He's the one that has this revelation, this wisdom. And God has shared this with him. So God deserves the glory because God reveals the mystery and he makes it known for his divine purpose. He deserves it because he's above all. He is the creator. We are the creation. So Daniel here in the next 4 or 5 verses is going to clearly explain that he was even able to tell the king what he was thinking about as the vision came. And the king was thinking about the latter days and what would come of his kingdom. Right? So think of it this way. This was the most, how do I say this? Spectacular, greatest empire ever. Ever. God even calls Nebuchadnezzar the King of Kings in Ezekiel. And you're like, what? I thought God was King of Kings. Yes, he is. But it's a capital K king of little, lowercase kings. And when he explains that Nebuchadnezzar is King of Kings, it's 2 lowercase k's. So the King of Kings, like he's the greatest king, earthly king of all the kings to ever live. Now God obviously is the king above any other king ever. He gets this recognition. So understand that Babylon in this time is the greatest empire, is the greatest city to ever be. And that's why when we're going to break this down as we get through it next week, we're going to have to finish next week, that Nebuchadnezzar is the head of the image. Right? Babylon is the head of the image. And it's made out of what material? Gold, which is the most expensive and grand material out of all of them, correct? And it's at the top, and it's the head. So everything defines it as the best, and Babylon was the best. And we even see as we read through the dream and the interpretation that Daniel says another kingdom will come after you, but it's going to be what? Superior or inferior? Inferior, right? So Babylon is the greatest kingdom that has ever been. Nothing will ever be greater than it. Not even after us in 2024. Not even America, right? America is just a little blip on the radar. Babylon is the greatest kingdom. And with that, Nebuchadnezzar is the greatest king. He's the only person in all of history who has had the most power of any person ever. Because he was not ruled by any laws or anything. Like he was the one man to make all the rules and all the decisions. Nobody was above him. Nobody could say otherwise. When we get into the other kingdoms, the rule was split between people, and then we got into democracy and all these things. So he alone is the greatest of them all. And I say this because with that comes so much responsibility. And I'm sure there was times where he's like, what's going to happen to my kingdom? Right? And so that's what's happening as he's sleeping. He's thinking about the latter days of his kingdom. And Daniel's explaining this. I even know what you were thinking when this dream came about. He's struggling with, okay, I have all this power and all this authority. Is somebody going to assassinate me? Is somebody going to try to, is another, empire going to try and take over? He's thinking about these things as it comes. And so God is going to reveal what the latter days of Nebuchadnezzar are going to be and what the latter days of mankind is going to be. All within this interpretation, all within this dream. But we'll get into that next time when we meet. And we'll pick it up in the actual dream in verse 31. Please come back next week because there's so much good things to this.